It's Nations League time, which sounds more like an early 20th century intergovernmental organization designed to ensure world peace, but it's actually something even more important than that, a CONCACAF football tournament, which is at the quarter-final stage, in which our United States boys are poised to face up to a lesser team, more a traumatic memory. It's impossible for any American football fan to hear those two dreaded words, Trinidad and Tobago. It's actually three, but ampersand, and not have a shiver run down their spine. It's like picking up a call from an unknown number to hear the voice of your ex on the other line. But part of the recovery from trauma, or so I've been told, is confronting it. And so it's my joy to break down the two games we have looming in front of us, home and away, Thursday night, then next Monday, with my friend, former US men's national team striker turned ESPN broadcaster extraordinaire, turned host of the quite incredible Vamos podcast on the Men in Blazers Media Network. God, it's always good to see the mighty Hercules Gomez.
Raj, how you doing, my man? I can't tell you how excited I am to be with you once again.
You beautiful human being. Genuinely, one of the joys in a time of darkness is to sit with you. But we do need to plummet into darkness to begin. Let's start in US soccer's upside down. Herc, let's go back to that night, October 10th, 2017. Now, incredibly, more than 6 long years ago, the United States lost 2-1 to Trinidad and Tobago in Couva, failing to qualify for the World Cup for the first time since 1986. And I feel a bit like Dr. Melfi with Tony Soprano here, Herc, but tell me about it. Where were you? How did you experience that night? Lay it on me.
Oh man, you're gonna make me relive this. This is and not just because it's the
It's good for you.
U.S. not
Healthy.
making the World Cup, but one of the hardest nights of my professional career. I was on the tail end of my first year as a broadcast professional. I just retired from the Seattle Sounders, went out on top with a championship, and I moved out to Bristol. And I'm trying to make this a gig, make this a life. And I'm working at ESPN, and I remember the lead up to this. The U.S. was somewhat struggling. They had just let Jurgen Klinsmann go at the beginning of that cycle. He only had 2 games: the Mexico game at home and the Costa Rica away. Both were shambolic for the U.S. men's national team. Bruce Arena comes in, so I would regularly go on to ESPN FC, and ESPN FC is very Brit centric at times, and sometimes it can feel like my counterparts would make less of the U.S. men's national team. So, I came up there with my chest puffed up, and it was like a summer of back and
Out of my way,
with,
Shaka Hislop.
with the Craig Burleys of the world, the Stevie Nichols, the Shaka Hislops. It was a lot of fun. And I remember thinking to myself when I did the pregame analysis on FC, I remember seeing the SPI, Raj. It said 3% chance. That's a soccer power index at that time that ESPN would have. A 3% chance that the U.S. men's national team does not make it. I still remember 3% chance. Something like, it wasn't something like, it had to be Honduras beat Mexico, and Honduras was not great. Mexico was rolling high. I mean, they were pretty much in. They were trouncing everybody with Juan Carlos Osorio. Panama had to beat Costa Rica. Costa Rica was at home. No way they lose to Panama. Panama scores on a phantom goal, by the way. The goal never goes in. The U.S. had to lose. A tie would have sufficed. And all these things happened. The stars align, and the U.S. men's national team is out. I remember being that night at ESPN, having to do hits that night, and thinking, what just happened? And across the room, as the game's going on, Shaka Hislop, who was a Trinidad and Tobago national team legend, he's sitting there, and I can hear him celebrating. I can hear him in awe, like this just didn't happen. Alvin Jones, cross, and Omar Gonzalez, own goal. By the way, we had Omar Gonzalez a few weeks ago on Vamos, and he explains the feeling of everything there. Insane explanation and what he had to go through afterwards. But just like Alvin Jones again drops a worldly, and I remember just being numb. Not numb because the U.S. going up, but numb like, what am I witnessing? And the following 36 to 48 hours were some of the craziest hours of my life. I had to literally eat crow from 7 a.m. to midnight the next day, every hour on the hour in Latin American football and domestic in English, and sit there and explain to the world how it was that the U.S. men's national team was not going to participate in the 2018 World Cup.
And explain our Lord Taylor Twellman's words. What are we doing here? I mean, looking back on that night 6 long years ago, which feels like a lifetime later, what was the big lesson at the core of it? And have we learned that lesson as a footballing nation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because if you think about if there are any actual lessons to take from a failure like that, there absolutely are. And I think it comes to the federation, the absolute necessity of having competent people at the helm who have a project, who have a plan. And what I mean by that is nobody expects things to go south at the beginning of a World Cup qualification. But Sunil Gulati, the president of the federation at that time, had just extended Jurgen Klinsmann 4 more years after getting out of the group of death in the 2014 World Cup. And after 2 games, ends that. So guaranteed money to this coach, and you end the process after 2 games. In comes a new coach with new ideas, new beliefs after 2 games. And out of these new ideas, new beliefs, there is never a plan of how to usher in the next generation. So when you look at the results and the lead up to this game and where they went back to back lineups. Panama in Orlando, trashed Panama, going into Trinidad thinking with the same lineup, a lineup which, by the way, 14 players played, 10 were from Major League Soccer. Out of those 10, I can go to the names of Josie Altidore, Michael Bradley, Clint Dempsey, Benny Feilhaber, Brad Guzan, DeMarcus Beasley, Bedoya. Those are all players who came back to Major League Soccer from European football, and that hurt the program. There was a lack of plan. There was a lack of ushering the next generation. So when these players they're in Caribbean grounds, they've got no legs against a fresher, more motivated team. When all you needed was a point, this will happen. So what I'm trying to get to is the lack of preparation, the lack of an actual project and plan is what hurt you. And out of those ashes came this new generation, this new plan.
God, it's so funny. I mean, we even talking through those names, we are in a whole different world, a whole different reality. I do remember interviewing Bruce Arena right when he took the job, when he came back to try and do his fireman act. And every question I asked him, he just kind of pursed his lips and just kept saying, "It's not my first rodeo, you know." And I kind of felt
Well, it was his last.
I was kind of like, I was like, God, it's really a variation of that was his answer for almost everything. And I was like, oh my God, we could be really effed here. And so we
But
were.
Raj, it's that arrogance because leading up to that game, I don't know if you recall, the social media handles for the U.S. men's national team were making fun of the field and how flooded the field was. They were taking video of players piggybacking on each other to not get wet. So it lit a fire under a whole nation in Trinidad. And talking to Shaka Hislop, who's from Trinidad and who's played at the highest of levels in the Premier League, in the World Cup, he took exception to that. How are these players not going to take exception to that?
God, the leadership has changed. And I do want to start. Thank God we're in a different world, but with a very quick toast before we jump in. I want to raise this first Bud Light of the day to new managers, specifically Emma Hayes, who yesterday was officially named US Women's National Team head coach. I'll just say US Soccer, and we'll talk about this post game on the Do It Live. If any of you want to talk about it on YouTube, US Soccer needed a heavyweight coach who could upgrade quickly, massively, the program's tactical sophistication. They've gone out and got one of the biggest names in the game, just a master of culture building, motivation, and football IQ. And I can't wait to watch her roll on May 2024 when she takes the helm and buckle up. But let's get back to the men. Herc, let's hop into the DeLorean, hit 88 miles per hour, bring it back to the future. And by that, I mean the CONCACAF Nations League. And before we get into this week's games, let's talk about the competition as a whole, because the inaugural edition played in 2019 AD. Yes, it's a tournament manufactured by those creative brains at CONCACAF, to get its 41 teams, more regular competitive games in place of friendlies that used to be in these windows. Serious question. The Gold Cup, we know it's a big income generator for the region, funds the smaller nations like your Arubas and your Montserrats. But what do these tournaments like the Gold Cup, the Nations League, what do they really mean for the United States? Because the case could be made they give us memories, but they're really empty calories from a footballing perspective. What we really need is to be eating protein-rich meals for the Copa, the World Cup, and prepare properly for the competitions which are really going to define us, and the competitions which really elude us as a footballing nation on the men's side still.
Raj, I'm so glad you made the point of what does it mean for the U.S. men's national team, because we could sit here and argue that it means a great deal for these smaller CONCACAF nations because they get the most out of it, right? They are going to play against the likes of the US, against the likes of Mexico, against the likes of Costa Rica. They're going to get a lot more out of that. But when the US is forced, when Mexico is forced, when Costa Rica is forced, Canada to play against these Caribbean countries, they're missing out on these games that they can be playing. Because in my time, I remember it was against Italy in Europe, it was against Belgium, it was against Mexico in the Azteca, it was against Germany. Uh, with the inclusion, and this is a straight copy of the UEFA Nations League, all you're doing is saturating the calendar with more tournaments, more games for these players. So now these national teams can't go out and get quality opposition. So there are two different things here. What CONCACAF and the Caribbean and the Central American countries get out of this, and what the traditional powers in CONCACAF get out of this. And yes, you're right, it's money.
And it should be said, the US has won both editions of the tournament so far. The first, a 3-2 extra time win over Mexico, which Christian Pulisic fired home an extra time penalty. Magnificent. And then Highlands, Ranch, Colorado's Ethan Horvath saved a penalty with essentially the last kick of the ball. And one thing we do know about this US team, the players seem to care deeply, which is so bloody wonderful and likable to see them celebrate each goal with such ferocity and then use Christian Pulisic for a game of champagne bowling across the greasy locker room floor to celebrate. What does that say about this group, Herc, that they are so clearly brought into this competition?
It's about winning, right? I think that's one of the great things that Greg Berhalter has done. And credit goes to the federation as well, because we talked about the lessons learned and how there wasn't that new generation being ushered into this 2018 lead up for the World Cup and ultimately the failure. Well, out of that, they were forced to usher in a new generation and to let them have these, you know, road bumps ahead of them. People forget that it wasn't always dominance over Mexico. 2019 Gold Cup, the U.S. lost on home soil to Mexico. Jonathan Dos Santos 1-0 goal in the final. Tata Martino and Mexico, the last time they had any luck against the U.S. men's national team, they dominated the U.S. men's national team in New Jersey. Serginho Dest had Tecatito Corona, pretty much drop his pants down the sideline, chip in a pin perfect pass to Javier El Chicharito Hernandez, and that was the beginning of these lessons learned for this team. He's empowered these players to make this team their own, but the trade-off is we want to win everything. We are installing a culture where it doesn't matter who we play, what we have to win, and especially against teams like Mexico. So when you're talking about this tournament, when you're talking about these games, it's with the sole focus of dominating your region, and they understand that means Mexico.
Okay, to this week and this team, 24 United States players of Avenger assembled in Austin, Texas. Many of them are Aronsons, both Paxton and Brendan selected together for the first time, which is magnificent. The rest, they've come to watch Weston McKinney bust out a little line dancing, but they've also come to play some football. That number, however, shrunk to 23 when New Jersey-born, Brazil-bred Johnny Cardozo withdrew from the squad with an ankle injury. Johnny's not the only one who is out with some medical challenge. Two enormous absences. Juventus Turbo Tim Weah out with a thigh injury. He picked up against Verona at the end of October. We will bloody well miss his blurring thrust on that flank. But it gets worse, listeners. Our Lord and Saviour, Christian Pulisic, still suffering from the same muscle knack that made us all hold our breath in horror at the end of AC Milan's Champions League game against PSG. Herc, I think it would be hard to argue these two, they are the most consistently dynamic attackers in a US jersey of late. So big picture, and then we'll go through some specifics. Where do you see that creative spark coming from? Because there's a lot of possibilities. Which players do you think are currently swaggering around Austin, trying to find Franklin Barbecue, but thinking, this is my moment to show I can be the creative heartbeat of this team?
Yeah, I think it starts and it ends with Gio Reyna, right? If we're talking about who's going to be that creative force, with two players that are so dynamic, and Timothy Weah is an interesting case because he's played left back, he's played right back at Lille, now at Juventus in the right wing back formation. But with the U.S. men's national team, he's a winger, and he's been one of the most consistent players for Greg Berhalter. When you go back and think of him earning his place, he's the guy who's constantly in behind threatening defenses. He is a force to be reckoned with down that right hand side, and he's built quite a partnership with the likes of Christian Pulisic. But who gets him going? And we saw that versus Germany. We saw that versus Ghana. It's Gio Reyna. He understands the movements. He understands the tendencies, and he can unlock that with his talent, with the ball at his feet. It starts and ends with Gio Reyna. We're going to go down a list, but when you talk about like who needs to make this team his own, it's Gio Reyna.
So let's talk about him. He returned to the United States team in October for the first time under Greg Berhalter. Is that the games have been in the late great BJ Callahan era. So these were the first games they'd had together since that World Cup fracas. Got to credit Gio. To be honest, all the right things were said by everybody. Even though we do know this, that in life and in football, these wounds do take time to heal. Back with Dortmund now. Struggle for minutes, to be honest. What will he be thinking? No Pooley, no Tim Weah. Will he be thinking this is my opportunity to run this team, partly out of ambition, partly to make a lingering point to Greg?
That's a great point. I think partly out of ego as well. He strikes me as the type of player that enjoys that challenge, that has that chip on his shoulder, like it's my time, I can show you type now. Um, Hopefully he can use this as a refresher a la Christian Pulisic all last season when he wasn't playing with Chelsea. When he wasn't playing with Chelsea, he would come into the U.S. men's national team and he would perform. It would be his sanctuary for him, his sporting sanctuary. Gio has to do the same thing. And I think Greg's taken the right approach here, Raj, because if we look at before he came into the U.S. men's national team in the Germany and Ghana games, he had played something like 26 minutes for Dortmund. That was his season so far. And Greg is a lot of things, but he's very upfront and he plays his hand very easily. He told us it was going to be the same plan as Fowler and Balogun. That led me to believe he would start both games and be taken out at half, and that's what happened. It was the same plan, same design, and he did that. He played 45 minutes versus Germany, best player for the U.S. by far. He played 45 minutes versus Ghana, best player for the U.S. by far. And when he wasn't on the field, you saw a massive drop off for the U.S. men's national team. I think this is a great opportunity for Gio Reyna to come into this and not only say, okay, my feet are wet, but now this has to be mine.
But it was interesting hearing Chris Richards talk honestly about the challenge of minutes at Crystal Palace. He said explicitly, the US team has just become my joy. It's my place where I do express myself, and I hope we get to see that from Gio in this window. But there's another gent I wanted to ask you about, striker to striker, because I had a dream last night, a crappy not. My dream was I was hanging out with Flo Balogun in my dream, a gent who scored 3 goals in 9 games since moving to French Liga and third place team Monaco, but who's been visibly frustrated in a US jersey. The frustration seemed to revolve around the system that's not designed to serve him in the way that he knows he needs to be served to truly excel. And in my dream, Herc, he was like, with the injuries, I'm not going to do a very bad Flo Balogun impression, but imagine in my dream, Flo was speaking and he kept shrugging. He goes, with the injuries, they've got to play to my strengths now, right? And I'm not going to ask you to interpret my dream, Herc, because I do. My wife always says, you dream pretty literal dreams. They don't need a lot of explanation. But if you were the elite striker on this US squad, would it be right to expect that under these circumstances, without the Pulisic distraction, and by distraction, I mean Christian Pulisic is going to be the priority. He's going to be the first option on every game plan, that when he's taking the field. But without him there and without Tim Weah there, do you think it's right to expect under these circumstances we play to Flo Balogun's strengths?
These circumstances being the CONCACAF Nations League quarterfinal versus Trinidad, no. And I think Flo can find it very difficult, and he's going to learn what CONCACAF is about. How many times have we heard this, right? It's I recall Tyler Adams at the beginning of the last World Cup cycle talking about going back to the Bundesliga and talking to his buddies about how difficult it is to play in CONCACAF. It's like, hey, it's not beautiful fields. It's not the opponents that you think they're going to do the right things. There's a tendency for bad refereeing. There's a tendency for bad fields, for bad opponents, which do the opposite things of what they're supposed to do. So there's a cause for injury, et cetera, et cetera. It's difficult. And I think Flo's going to find that out. Here's the thing with Flo and with any striker. It's about confidence. And in Folarin Balogun right now, we're talking about maybe for the first time in his career that he's finding it difficult to score. He's gone 4 games for Monaco without a goal. In those 4 games, Raj, he was taken out at half in one of those games, and he was only played 17 minutes in another game. So right now he's in a moment where the confidence is hard to come by. He's, I believe, in or around the top 5 in goal scoring for his club. Ben Yedder, who's 32 years old, he's the leading goal scorer. He's the captain of that team. Alexander Golovin, the Russian, he's got more goals than him, and he's an attacking center midfielder. He's having a hard time right now finding his form. Certainly a far cry from the plus 20 goals we saw last year that he had scored. He needs to just do the right things to develop and understand that maybe this U.S. men's national team, maybe the system isn't catered to the 9. And what I mean by that is if you watch this team play, it's not for the Fowler and Balagans, it's not for the Ricardo Pepis, it's not for the Josh Sargents, it's not for the Daryl Dikes or insert striker here. It's for the wingers to be dangerous. It's for Christian Pulisic to be dangerous. It's for Timothy Weah to be dangerous. It's for maybe a Weston McKennie coming underneath or a Giovanni Reyna. That is the danger zone. The 9 can be dangerous, but it's not the priority in this system. As a 9, I played the position. That is frustrating. You want to see the fruits of your labor be rewarded with goals, be rewarded with assists. That's not going to be the case. So it will be very interesting to see how Greg Berhalter utilizes Farland Balogun, whose biggest strength is his movement, in a situation where he's going to be maybe thinking those spaces are going to be limited versus a team like Trinidad and Tobago, which most certainly will try to prioritize defending, even though the last 3 games have certainly not shown that on paper. It's in 3 games for the U.S. men's national team, a 19-0 scoreline. So there will be spaces, there will be moments. I just don't think they will be catered to a player like Fowler and Balogun.
SPI is going to look at that those last 3 games and give us a 3% chance of losing, and Trinidad and Tobago are going to love it. But I will report back to Flo Balogun tonight, your analysis in my dream, so that he's mentally prepared. And by the way, I did love this story that Flo Balogun somehow still has zero idea that Brendan and Paxton Aronson are brothers. He just thought they had the same name. He just thought they had the same last name, which I just love.
I guarantee he probably thinks they're the same person. So I wouldn't doubt that.
One gent I do want to ask you about, and like so many US fans, I've reveled in watching PSV Eindhoven this season, and why not? The only top 6 league team in Europe to have a perfect record. Most Americans in the Netherlands since Operation Market Garden. We just launched this new series, PSV USA. You can catch the first episode with Ernie Stewart talking about his philosophy and trying to rebuild them so bloody quickly with an American heartbeat at the core of it. It's really magnificent. But there's one gent I'm fascinated to hear your take on, because obviously we love Pepe on this show. We've talked about him together, you and I. His confidence, his tenacity, his perseverance, his clinicality. But I want to highlight his club teammate, Malik Tillman, just 21 years old, been so impactful in Eredivisie, made the most of every moment off the bench for PSV, being tipped to earn a starting place soon there. He was like a human hand grenade for Rangers last season in Scotland. What will it take for him to gain a real foothold, a real chance for more than scraps of time in garbage time for this US team?
Great question. I think unfortunately it's going to take maybe an injury or suspension or rotation for him. Um, but man, have I been impressed, Raj. He's played a little over 500 minutes in the Eredivisie for PSV. He's got 5 goals in 8 games. And if you're ever around on a Monday morning when Serginho Dest drops his highlight reel on Instagram, Malik
Yeah,
Tillman is usually in
win
it.
or lose. Win or lose. That's Serginho Dest. We got lumped 4-0 in Europe. Here's my highlights.
Beautiful highlights. No
It's
defensive
amazing.
highlights, but
By the
going
way,
forward,
he is the greatest. I love Attack Life with Serginho Dest just pulling joy out of both great
you
times and bad times. You'll do all right. But go on.
you know that saying on Ted Lasso, be a goldfish. Oh, mine is be Serginho Dest. Like just be Serginho Dest. And Serginho Dest, when he drops that highlight, Raj, usually Malik Tillman's in it. And it's not just dropping goals. It's not just scoring bangers, but it's the combination play. It's how intelligent he is, the movements, the 1v1s. He is really a complete player. And what I love about him is he really is. And what I love about him is he's a 10 that plays like a 9.5, has a finished product to him, but he can go wide or inside and skin you 1v1. And he's very silky. He's got that game about him that Weston has where he can come from a deep line position and crash the box to end a play. I really like him. 20 years old, double-digit goals last year in Scotland. Fine, Scotland, say what you will. Moves up a level, hasn't missed a beat. A little over 500 minutes. I repeat, a little over 500 minutes, and he's scoring goals, 5 of them. There are a few players on that team, and I'll take Ricardo Pepi. Ricardo Pepi has the bad luck of being behind team captain Luke de Jong, who's got 10 goals, 6 assists. He's like a front runner for the MVP in the Eredivisie for a team that's perfect. He's got the bad luck of being behind him. Malik Tillman is maybe getting these scrap minutes here and there, but he's forcing the hand of his manager to play him more and more and more. So he's starting. So he's playing in Champions League and he's getting these goals. He's finding a way to make it difficult for you to not play him, for you to say, I can't not give this guy a chance. I think the same thing can happen on the U.S. men's national team, but I don't see it at the expense of a Giovanni Reyna. I don't see him playing on the wing. I see him playing in the exact position of Gio Reyna. So we got a beautiful position battle. And for, I would say, the misfortune of Giovanni and the fortune of Malik, Giovanni's not proven to stay healthy for both club and country throughout a course of a calendar year. So Malik will have his opportunities.
Godspeed. I watch him and I marvel. He is an American player who takes the field, and whatever field it is, believes he can enforce his will upon all comers. And that is exactly the mindset that we do need and we will need in the years to come. One very quick note: Gaga Slonina of Chelsea, currently on loan at Eupen in Belgium, 19 years of age, ex-Chicago Fire, 1 cap. This is the first time he's been called up with the United States A team at the time when, and it pains me to talk about this, our great friend and one of the real faces of this US team, Matt Turner, who's just lost his starting place at Nottingham Forest. And we enter that weird US #1 dilemma from the last cycle of watching our best keeper fighting for playing time with his club team. How do you think about this moment? Because for Matt Turner, I've got to say, I feel for him.
You have to feel for him. I mean, Matt Turner signs with Nottingham Forest and they go out and spend the same amount on the goalkeeper who's also 29 years of age in Greek international Vlachodimos, Odysseus Vlachodimos. And it takes a Matt Turner gaff versus Liverpool where he comes out and misses the ball and Mo Salah kind of taps it in. And the manager said he would back him and then benches him. You have to feel for him. I'm of the vein, I'm of the thought that goalkeepers aren't human, Raj. The goalkeepers are different, and they don't need to consistently start for them to produce, for them to be sharp. I've had conversations with Casey Keller. He does not believe this. He happens to think they are human and that form is relative to how sharp you are and how your game time is, et cetera, et cetera. I think the only way out of this for Matt Turner is to work. And we spoke about Christian Pulisic sinking sanctuary last season in the U.S. men's national team and how certain players can do it in this men's national team. I think it's the same thing for Matt Turner. And listen, this isn't the first time in Matt Turner's history as a person or a professional where a gaffe has kind of defined him for the better. I believe it was in college or high school. I think it was high school where
College.
it was college where he had the gaff where the ball goes up in the air and he pretty much puts the ball into himself and it becomes a sports center, not top 10, and how that defined him.
Crushed
I
him.
think, yeah, it crushed him mentally, but I also think it gave him something to shoot for. It gave him a carrot dangling in front of him, something to work for. I think this is the same thing. He's the clear cut number one right now for the U.S. men's national team. Nobody's taken that away from him. He's earned that right. How he goes about it now, not only with the national team, but in his club career, that could define him in his professional years. He's 29 years old. He's no spring chicken. Goalkeepers play way until the latter years. I understand that, but this is a defining moment in his career.
Godspeed to you, Matt Turner. One last question on the United States before we touch on TNT. I want to ask you, which low-key player makes an impact in this window? Someone who we're not talking about as much as we should, who we will be come Tuesday morning. A lot of options. 25-year-old Alex Dejas, fine form at the end of Liga MX Clausura, helping Club America win the title. 4 goals and 1 assist since September. Kevin Paredes, the 20-year-old from South Riding, Virginia, the golden boy, grabbing the spotlight at Wolfsburg in Germany whenever he can. Who on your list is the gent who we will be talking about come Tuesday morning?
I mean, those are two good ones, right? Alex Sendejas, the regular season first place for Club America, and Kevin Paredes, who's been playing a lot more than anybody would have expected. I'm going to give you a name that's a little blast from the past. Who needs this? It's Brendan Aronson. Brendan Aronson struggled at Leeds, goes to Union Berlin. He's been struggling somewhat Union Berlin. But if you look at the last performances for the U.S. men's national team, he's gotten his name on a score sheet. He's got an assist, and he continues to earn the trust of Greg Berhalter. I go back to World Cup qualifying. How productive was Brendan Aronson? He's a player that's not flashy. He's a player that doesn't really pass the eye test, but he's always active. He's always in it. He always seems to earn the trust of his teammates and coach. He will be on the field, and I do think he will come up with some more goals. I think it's Brendan Aronson.
God, I love that. Please make that so. But we do need to touch on Trinidad and Tobago, that proud nation of Carnival, the world's largest natural asphalt deposit. Oh, and Nicki Minaj. Not exactly a footballing superpower. Currently ranked 70th by FIFA. US is ranked 11th right now, 1 place ahead of Mexico. TNT producing fine footballers. It's a nation, it's a cricket mad nation. Is how one thinks about TNT, but it has produced some accomplished footballers. Dwight York of Manchester United, Justin Hoyt of Arsenal. Yeah, but Herc, obviously Shaka Hislop would be furious, quite rightly, if we do not mention, and Shaka Hislop of Newcastle right now. What an incredible human being Shaka is. Herc, tell us something. You played them all in your time. Tell us something that distinguishes Trinidad and Tobago in this Star Wars cantina of CONCACAF characters.
I mean, like the majority Caribbean teams are very difficult to play against at home. The conditions are not ideal. The last Caribbean team that I played was Antigua and Barbuda in Antigua, and it was in a cricket field on monsoon-like weather. Uh, the opponent make it very difficult, Raj. It's not as easy as one would think. And I go back to what Tyler Adams said about playing in CONCACAF. It's one of the few confederations where you can go into tropical weather, you can go into rain, snow, desert, altitude, all within the same month, in different places. Synthetic fields, it's very difficult. Now, should the US win? Yes. Can there be problems presented because of the opponent? Absolutely. You go back into that 2-1 COVID defeat, Alvin Jones, you know, was part in both goals. A cross that Omar Gonzalez ended up putting over his own goalkeeper, Tim Howard, legendary goalkeeper. And then he drops a worldly. right after that. One of the best goals you will ever see anywhere. So they have individual
Too soon,
talent.
Herc. Too soon.
They have individual talent. They have players who individually can really hurt you. It's their collective that seems to be the problem for them.
It should also be noted TNT is a nation, or the nations, that brought us a gent whose shadow still looms large over global football. And I'm talking about Jack Warner, sort of like
Yes.
the Ringo of FIFA's corruption beetles, Chuck Blazer, obviously Pete Best. Um, our history against the Soca Warriors is long. It's occasionally distinguished. Modern football historians will be quick to remind us Trinidad and Tobago was the site of Paul Caligiuri's shot heard round the world. I'll find it on YouTube. It's really magnificent. November 19, 1989, secured victory over TNT, qualified the US for Italia 90, our first World Cup in 40 years. But there's also 2017, which we've also already gone over. That night of ignominy, we've played them 3 times since. 6-0 win for the United States on June 2019 in the Gold Cup. 7-0 friendly win for the US in the 2021 January window, and a 6-0 win for the United States July 2023, again in the Gold Cup in Charlotte. Jesus Ferreira going full Pirate of the Caribbean mode with a hat trick. Going all take what you can, give nothing back. And this current iteration of Trinidad and Tobago is managed by 51-year-old former Soca warrior Angus Eve, who took over from Englishman Terry Fenwick after he failed to get them out the first round of World Cup qualifying last cycle. Herc, top line, what should we expect from this team?
I think you should expect a professional performance. I don't think there are going to be any surprises, and I don't think the U.S. men's national team is going to take Trinidad lightly. You can't. Um, Last time you took them lightly, you were out of a World Cup. I don't care what the percentage was. You have to win that game. You did not win that game. You should have won that game. Um, I think we're going to see a team in the U.S. men's national team put in a professional performance. And it's going to be a multi-goal win. I think talent-wise, there's just so much more talent. Even though there are players like Christian Pulisic, Timothy Weah, it's just so overwhelmingly the U.S. is in the advantage in that department. I don't see really any way. I give it less than a 3% chance this go around.
Who needs the SPI when you got the old Hercometer? Looking up and down their 23-man roster, there's 15 players who play their trade abroad, 8 in the domestic TT Premier League football, which I have to say, has some of the great club names in global football. Defence Force FC and Prison Service FC amongst them. I'm sure their fans have got some chance. Their leading scorer, Miami FC's Ryan Tefler, 9 goals, one of a number of USL players on the roster. He'll combine with the likes of striker Levi Garcia, who plays in Greece for AEK Athens, coming off scoring last week in the Greek Super League. Herc, this is not a group of players the United States will be playing against week in, week out, quality level individually. I'm sure Greg will have them watching some tape beforehand. But as a player, I've spoken to some players who will remain nameless who say that it's sometimes hard playing in CONCACAF because the players do things that you don't expect when you're playing in
Yeah,
like England or Spain. You kind of get used to what someone's going to do in a situation or situations on the ball. And the fact is, in CONCACAF, they often do something completely different, which is what kind of freaks you out. You have to almost rewire your brain to play CONCACAF. As a player, does it make it more challenging to play against gents who are relatively unknown commodities? Can they be even more dangerous because of that?
absolutely. I will start with what you said about how it makes it difficult. I touched upon this in the beginning of this episode, of this podcast, how sometimes the opponent isn't educated in the footballing way as the rest of the world, so they do unconventional things that could lead to injury. There are certain ways you go into a tackle, certain ways you try to get out of a tackle for your safety, for the opponent's safety. There are certain things you do to combine. There are certain things the game tells us when tactically in conjunction with the team you have to do that sometimes a lot of these players don't do. Um, that unpredictability could be an advantage. And Levi Garcia is a very good player. AEK Athens. I don't know if you saw that game versus Brighton. Hell of a game. he caused Brighton so many fits. I mean, he is a player that just 1v1 in a space, ball at his feet, can cause all types of damage. So they have the ability to hurt you. They also have the ability to hurt you in the way that we just mentioned, with how unconventional they are. It's very difficult. That's the thing. People won't ever buy into the idea of how complicated this gets because they see on paper how overwhelmingly more of an advantage one should have over the other.
Pay no attention to the SPI. If that's the only thing you take from this podcast, then our job is done. Last question for you, Herc, you beautiful human being. The game Thursday night will be in Austin. What a growing force that city's football culture is in all of our lives. I utterly adore it. So it's time. Herc, spoiler alert. How do you think this game will go, and what will the final score be?
I said it on Vamos, in our drop the bag segment. We went with a multiple goal win, so by 2 goals or more, win for the U.S. men's national team. It pays plus 340, which I think is very generous. Get on that one, Raj. I actually think it's going to be like a 4-5, maybe 6-0 win for the U.S. men's national team on home soil. I don't see how Trinidad complicates this for this team. No Jesus Ferreira, no Pirate of the Caribbean, but they will get the job done.
I actually think this game will be 4-1 to the United States. Balo is going to get out of my dreams and into my car. He's going to score twice. And somehow, Jesus Ferreira will still score a hat-trick, even though he's not even in the squad. It's going to happen anyway, Herc, right?
Dude, it's insane. Listen, we joke around with Jesus Ferreira, but the kid scored 15 goals in like 23 games, and only 3 of those have been in friendlies. Now, the majority may be against Caribbean or Central American competition, but you cannot ignore those numbers.
Yeah, I've got to say, if I was a data analyst or a scout for Prison Service FC in the TT Premier League, I would be putting in a bid. I'd be putting in a bid for Jesus Ferreira. Bite your arm off. To tune in again, first leg of this CONCACAF Nations League quarterfinal extravaganza going down tomorrow night, Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time from Austin, Texas. I could go for some breakfast tacos from Royal Blue Grocery right now. Game will be on TNT, also on Max, which is also the name of the person that's editing this podcast. He's got his own channel, and Peacock. I will be live right after the game. Come and join me on YouTube Live. Just subscribe to our YouTube page. Come on, ask the questions, post-game, live on the pod. After you've marvelled at that Jesus Ferreira hat-trick, and Herc, you'll be back with us Monday to break down the first leg, preview the second. I cannot tell you how grateful I am to have this time to speak with you.
Always, my man. I'm more of a Joe Public guy, by the way, but I appreciate the chance.
Godspeed. Get Herc some Joe Public merch, even as we speak. Get that Joe Public endorsement going. They folded. Oh, bad news. News just producer. Oh my God. I can't end on that. Jack Warner must have owned them. God bless to you, Herc, you incredible human being. Until Monday, vamos, courage, and go USA.